Hi, I'm Caleb, and for my Unity and Diversity talk, my book was Fair Isn't Always Equal by Rick Wormeli. And I found a nice little graphic online that kind of went along well with this book. And it has a monkey, an elephant, a fish, a seal, and a dog standing in front of a teacher. And he says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And the teacher points at a tree behind them. That's not really going to work well for the elephant because he's too big, or the fish because he swims and he can't even get on ground like this. And my book spent a lot of time talking about how do you test people, how do you show that they know what they know, how do you see how they know what you're teaching them and how they understand it and how they go along with it, how they can go with it. So before I get into it, I'll talk a little bit about the author, Rick Wormeli. He was one of the first National Board certified teachers in the U.S. Not just being certified to teach, but he was the first to teach everywhere. Not just in his home state or wherever he was, but in the entire nation. He has over 36 years of teaching experience in schools and also coaching teachers and principals on how to become better teachers and how to become better administrators in a school. He was the recipient of the Disney's American Teacher Awards 1996 Outstanding English Teacher of the Nation. He's now a columnist for the Association of Middle Level Education, or the AMLE, and he also trains educators and principals still to this day. Before I get started more in depth in the book, I'd like to go over the standards that apply to this book, because I feel like you need to know the standards before you can really understand this book. And the standards that I'm going to use are the ITASC. It's the Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium standards. And there are 6 standards that really apply to this book out of the 14 for the ITASC, but there's only one of them that really stands out, and that's their number 6, assessment. The teacher understands and uses multiple methods of assessment to engage learners in their own growth, to monitor learner progress, and to guide the teachers' and learners' decision making. That one fits perfectly for this book. Some of the others, though, were learner development, or learner differences, learning environments, application of content, planning for instruction, and instructional strategies. To start off in his book, Rick spends a big time talking about mastery. Mastery, as Ben Franklin wrote, Tim was so learned that he could name a horse in 9 languages, but he was so ignorant that he bought a cow to ride on. As you see there, it's not just knowing, but it's understanding. It's about being able to comprehend what you're being taught and not just knowing it. Mastery is also being able to analyze and to evaluate situations and problems, not just knowing the specific answer. And right here in this figure, I pulled this figure out of the book, and I just thought I would go over with some of the examples of having mastery and not having mastery. And the first one says, the student can hear or read about a situation that requires repeated addition and identifies it as a multiplication opportunity, then uses multiplication accurately to shorten the solution process. And for a student who is not mastered in this, it says the student can repeat the multiplication table through the 12s. This is more about automaticity, how automatic a student is when reciting the information or solutions. Automaticity often comes with mastery, but sometimes it is just recitation, not understanding. In his book, he also talks about differentiated instruction, which is doing what's fair for the students. It is a collection of best practices strategically employed to maximize students' learning at every turn, including giving them the tools to handle anything that is undifferentiated. Some examples of this would be small group work, proximity to students to keep them focused, allowing students to sit there when they learn best, to sit where they learn best. Change problems for students who didn't understand a concept of the previous problem. So there you would change it and you would go over what you would change. Moving on. By differentiating instruction, we can maximize the student's learning potential with an excellent environment. A great analogy for differentiated instruction comes from The Sound of Music by Rodgers and Hammerstein's movie. At one point, Maria von Trapp, Julie Andrews, takes the 7 children on a bike ride. As they ride, some children follow the teacher, some ride alongside the teacher, and some move ahead. One is carried piggyback style on Maria's back because she can't ride at all. Despite everyone's different rate and competency with bike riding, the group is moving as a whole. Everyone is on the trip, advanced and struggling bike riders, and no one is left behind. The teacher scaffolded the instruction for some of them, and she allowed the more advanced children to surpass the teacher in execution of skill. So the teacher had some riding behind her, riding in front of her, riding beside her, and she was even carrying one because that student could not ride a bike. That's the perfect situation of differentiated instruction to allow all the students to be able to move forward and to progress at their own pace. But how do you assess in the differentiated classroom? And what is assessments? An assessment is a guided practice. Ways you can assess in a differentiated classroom are daily assessments that gives the teacher an idea of what the students know and what they don't know. By doing this, the teacher can use these daily assessments to see what they need to teach today. Not to really just to teach what's on their agenda, but to teach what the students don't know from their previous class meetings. Pre-assessments are assessments that are used to indicate students' readiness for content and skill development and to guide instructional decision. This is kind of what I was talking about, the daily assessments. It gives the teacher a chance to see what the students don't know, and it would guide their instruction if they use these correctly. Formative assessments are en route checkpoints done frequently. They provide ongoing and helpful feedback, informing instruction and reflecting subjects of the essential and enduring knowledge. Summative assessments are the big tests, the big exams that we take at the end of a unit to see what all we know from this unit. They have many objectives that are required to be filled, and there are many experiences, and their formats are negotiable if the product is not the literal standard and would prevent students from revealing what they know about a topic. They reflect most, if not all, the essential enduring knowledge. And when you're assessing in a differentiated classroom, you want to always give descriptive feedback. You want to begin with the end in mind. You want to allow the students to see what they need to understand and what they need to know. Not just tell them to read the entire chapter, but tell them what they need to know and what they need to understand so that they can move on and to progress. You want to design your pre-assessments around your summative assessments and have your formative daily assessments guide your students' learning for the summative assessment. You want to use these to show the students what they need to know and what they need to understand and comprehend for their final exam, for their final project, for their final report, whatever your summative assessment is for that unit. And you need to follow through with your formative assessments. It's similar to the real world. We don't pull our car with faulty brakes into a mechanic's shop and tell the mechanic, there's something wrong with this car. If you can figure out what it is and fix it, I'll pay you. In the real world, we always know what the outcome is supposed to be. We're not left guessing, well, what's wrong with the car? We know what's wrong with it and we are able to fix it. It should be the same way like that in schools. The students should know what they need to know and what they need to understand, and it not be a guessing game. For creating positive assessments, you need to throw out the generic multiple choice questions, like this question I also pulled from the book. It says, what is the best way to describe the Renaissance age? All of the below except D, a period in which all great artists lived, an age of widespread feudalism and rampant religious correctness. D, an age that turned scientific and artistic pursuits toward mankind instead of the church. C, an age of rebirth. Or F, none of the above. You don't want to use questions like this because students don't really know. What you are asking the students by using this question is, what do they know that you want them to know? It's what they think that you want is the right answer. B, C, and D, and E are all the correct answers, but they're also opinionated because great artists lived. Some people might not agree. Moving on, variety is key. A good mix of forced choices and constructed responses would get a better picture of a student's mastery level. We want to give the students every chance they can to show their mastery. You don't want to just sit there with multiple choices like these or just true and falses. You want it to be a big difference so that some students who don't do well at guessing or answering multiple choice questions, but they can explain it in wording what they're trying to mean, so they can do it that way to show their mastery. You want to make it efficient for all students. If you have true and false questions, you want to provide actual T's and actual F's. You don't want to just leave a blank and let them to fill it in with a T or an F. This would allow you to not have trouble interpreting poor marksmanship with T's or F's, because some T's may look like they're F's. You want to keep matchings on the same page so students don't have to flip pages to read the question and answers. By doing it this way, when they're flipping the page, they don't chance forgetting what they were reading on the last page. It's all right there on the page for them. And when you have matching, you want to keep them to 8 portions or less. You also want to highlight keywords that students might overlook. A specific number, most, least, not, best, etc. Not highlighting those, you're giving the students a chance to fail. You're not helping them. That's a common mistake a lot of students have. They misread these words and then they end up getting the problem wrong when in fact they do know the answer, but because they missed one of these words in the questions, they got it wrong. And you want to keep the test short. And you want to keep your questions of the same variety, to a minimal. You don't want to use more than 2 or 3 of similar questions. That is all it takes to judge a student's mastery. Do just enough to allow the student to show mastery, but not too many that it just becomes an endurance test. There's no reason to have 100 and 150 questions on a test, especially when 4 of those are asking the same thing but in different words. Keep those to 1 or 2 questions apiece and move on. They either know it or they don't. Just keep going with it. Now, for in my science classroom, which is what I'm getting endorsed in, I don't want to just have lectures. I want to have group projects. I want to have labs. I want to give them projects that they can do and that they can learn from, and not just sit there and have me stand in front of the classroom and just speak. I want to give them a better understanding of what they need to know and understand. I don't want to just give them a test and say, read chapter 13. I want them to know what I want them to know and what that they need to know for their tests. I will give them daily assessments so that I can use those to guide how I'm going to teach for the day. If a lot of the students get a certain question wrong, I may spend more time on that question for the day, and so that they actually will understand it instead of just guessing. My exams won't all be multiple choice like a lot of them are in science classes. I'll give some fill in the blank.